My name is Betty Jane Makings Bender. I was born October 3rd, 1925 in Rockport, Missouri, on a farm between Rockport and Tarkio.
And what were your parents' names?
My parents' names were Earl and Molly Makings, and I think I have a picture here. Oops, well, here. Earl and Molly Makings, and they were married March 20th, 1912 at Rockport, Missouri by Reverend Gilbert Cox. And his little sister, Edith Makings, and Eunice Slimp, my mother's sister, were their attendants. And Emmett Makings was best man. It was snowy and very cold, and they went in a horse and buggy. And so that was 1912. All right, now let's see. Oh, and my mother was Molly Jane Slimp, and her parents were James Valentine Slimp and Sophie A. McGinnis.
And what about your grandparents? What were your grandparents' names?
Oh, well, my grandparents were, I don't have a picture of my maternal grandparents. I never did see them. And I never did see my paternal grandparents. They were all deceased before I was ever born. But this is my grandfather, who was, let's see, I've already forgotten. Just a second here. As I said, I had not seen him. Got a lapse of memory here. Just a second. Okay. Well, I don't have those in order. Well, I've already forgotten. But she was Nancy King. I'm sorry. I never did see him, and so I never did know him. Well, anyway, that's a picture, and this is a picture of, that was way back. And this, the oldest was my dad. The second was Uncle Emmett. And the third was Aunt Donnie. They had 6 children. And my dad was the oldest. He was killed on the railroad, walking home, and a train hit him. And then his wife, Nancy, died just a short time later of pneumonia, leaving 6 children under the age of, is either 12 or 13. My dad was the oldest. So then they were, I believe it was Uncle Tom King that was given guardianship of the children. And there was some acreage, some farmland, and so it was evidently divided. I don't know. But anyway, Francis's father and mother had the King farm north of Rockport, and there were 2 houses on that. So the bachelor uncles, Uncle Tom and Uncle Ruth, and then Aunt Nan, who had never married, had kept house for them, and the older three lived with them, and then the three smaller, Uncle Ed, Aunt Edith was just a baby, I believe, and they lived with the Grandma and Grandpa King. And they all survived, and but it wasn't easy. So then, let's see. Is that all we need to know about the grandparents that I can remember?
Yeah, if there's any, if that's all you got, then that's fine. Do you have any particular memories that stand out of just times you were together?
Well, see, no, I never knew.
Whoa, but with your grandparents that you did know?
I did not know any of them.
Oh, okay.
No, they on both sides. They were all deceased before I was ever born.
Oh, I see.
But see, I wasn't born until 1925. And they were all, well, see, I don't have dates with me, but, and I was reading this from the Makings family history. I don't know the years. But anyway, that was the history that I know.
Yeah.
Now.
And maybe tell me a bit more about your parents.
My parents, as I said, were married in Rockport. And, of course, it was pretty hard times, Depression times. And my oldest brother, Eugene, was born in, they were, my mother and dad were married, that was, I think I told you, George Earl Makings and Molly Jane Slamp Makings. They were married on March 20th, 1912. Then my oldest brother Eugene was born in March of 1913. Then about 3 years later, I had a sister, baby sister that was, well, Helen Marie, and she died of pneumonia when she was just about a month old. And that would have been, I think 16, somewhere along in there. And then my brother Adrian, Willis Adrian Makings, was born in about 1918. And then my sister, Iva Ione Makings, was born in 1920. All of them at Rockport. And then I was born 5 years later in 1925. We were all pretty poor. And my Aunt Cecil, my dad's sister, and husband, Uncle Jess, had moved to Kansas City, Missouri from there. He was a mechanic, and automobiles were just being coming into use. So he got a job working on the automobile. So she and Cecil read in the paper they were building the Highway 169 from Kansas City, Missouri to St. Joe, Missouri. And they needed workers. So my dad came down looking for work to see if he could get a job helping build the highway. while we stayed with Aunt Donnie and Uncle Charlie Farley. And they already had 4 boys, and then there were 4 of us. And we all lived in that farmhouse, or survived in that farmhouse. I don't know, I think it took a month or so before Dad came back to move us down to Smithville, Missouri. And we've been there ever since. So.
And you were 9 months old?
What?
You were 9 months old? You were 9 months old?
Yes, I was 9 months old when we moved to Smithville, and that was that would have been 1926. Then after the highway was built, he helped build the Christian church, just as a laborer. And I have a picture of the church somewhere, because it was, well, I'll have to show you. It's not a very good one, but here it is.
Oh, wow.
Is that clear enough?
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
And that was back in 1926. And that was a very important part of my life, because even though my mother and dad didn't go to church, my sister and I did. And we lived on the farm, but we would walk to town to be in activities of the church. And the pianist, Estella Yates, thought I could sing. So when I was a little girl, she had me sing a lot of solos. And I still remember one about, I want to send a whisper song across the ocean blue to say to all the children there, Jesus loves you, loves you. And anyway, she was, and Miss Ernest Carver was superintendent of the Sunday school. And so we had a sand pile, and I played in that, and it was a very important part of my life. And then I was baptized in the Christian church when I was 12 years old, about 1937.
And what about your siblings? How many siblings did you have, and what were they like?
Well, my siblings was, oldest one was Glenn Eugene Makings. He was 13 years older than I was. So I don't remember too much about him, except I do remember in the, I think I was about in the 2nd grade, that he graduated from high school. No, I couldn't have been that. Could have been about 1st grade, because I remember he was graduating when I was starting. But anyway, it was Depression times, and there were hardly any jobs at all for the young men graduating from high school. So President Franklin Roosevelt had established the Conservation Civilian Corps, the CCC camps. And so many of the young men were going to that, and they received $30 a month, and they kept $5 to live on, and they sent $25 home to the families. And that's mostly what we lived on. My dad bought a sack of flour, sack of sugar, sack of beans, and then whatever else we could work, and that's what we lived on, which helped till after we got out of the Depression.
And
And then my second brother was Adrian, and Willis Adrian Makings, and he did work in high school. He helped in the grocery store, Mrs. Eugene Lewis, because at that time you could order groceries and they would deliver them to you. So he and his real good friend Clifton Moore delivered groceries to the elder people in Smithville when they had ordered them. And then my sister, Iva Ione, was 5 years older than I was, and we all graduated from Smithville High School, and we all attended Smithville from the time they were little till we graduated. And Ione graduated, 5 years ahead of me. So that'd been about 1938. And let's see. They were all very busy, very active. Like in the wintertime, we all made our own playtimes. And I can remember my brothers, when Little Platte River would freeze over, they would play hockey, because they'd just get a rock and then they'd get a stick, and they played, but they had lots of fun. And then they had marble games, and they'd have marble tournaments, and that was fun. And when I remember Eugene, when he was in high school, they had an old tar paper gym, but the boys played basketball, and they had lots of fun, and they had lots of friends. But they sometimes were kind of bad at Halloween, because I know one year Eugene and some of his friends did help bring the outhouse down the middle of Smithville. So they were pretty mischievous, but lots of fun. Let's see.
So how many siblings total did you
Well, actually 4, counting the one that passed away. But see, I never saw her or knew her or anything, because she was only a month old. And a lot of babies did pass away because they got pneumonia, and they did not have antibiotics or anything like that to treat them. And so there were a lot of losses of infants. And of course, we lived in cold houses. Should I go on? When I started to school, we lived out in the country, and we walked to school, except in the wintertime. Adrian and Ione and I all rode a horse. And then when we got to Smithville, there was a barn, and he tied up the horse in the barn until we got out of school, and then we could ride it home. But that was only in the wintertime. The rest of the time, we walked, and it was mud roads. And I remember one Christmas, my sister and I were in the Christian church Christmas program, and we always looked forward to that, because you'd get a big orange or you'd get a sack of candy, and we thought that was really great. But anyway, it came a snowstorm while we were at the church, and so this was Mrs. Eddie Yates. That was a friend of Ione's, her mother, said, "You all are not going to try to go home in this snowstorm. You're going to stay home with us." And so someone said, "Well, wouldn't your parents be worried? Couldn't you call them? Well, we had no telephones. They knew someone at the church would take care of us, and they did. The next day, after the snow was stopped and sun was shining, then we walked home. That's why the church has always had a very special place in my heart. I grew up there and learned Bible verses there. And when I was about in the 6th or 7th grade, we had a class that a young fellow, Forrest Young, taught our class. And he was very adamant about teaching us. And he would give us a test. He'd give us a lesson to study, and then he would give us a test the next week to see if we had studied it. But mostly what my knowledge of the Bible was, I did learn from him. And he was a good teacher, and he was very sincere in wanting us to learn. But the girls were kind of, well, they wanted to talk, and so he'd get kind of mad at us because they'd giggle and wouldn't pay attention. But that was when we were about in the 6th grade.
What do you remember about your baptism?
It was very sincere, and we had had some Bible classes, before. And let's see, I was baptized by, oh dear. Now I can't remember whether that was Dr. Waters or not, but there were several of us in my class. I think, I have that written down, but I can't remember the exact date. But anyway, there were several of us that were baptized at the same time, and I think it was about 1937, because I think I was about 12 years old. And it was very meaningful. There were, as I said, I think there were about 4 of us that were baptized at the same time, of my friends. And then I continued to grow, and I continued to stay there. We went to Christian Endeavor, we called it at that time, and always went to Sunday school, and I look forward to that. Is that all right? Is that enough?
Yeah, absolutely. Were you baptized in a river?
No. They, as I said, back when we'd moved to Smithville, they had what did I do with the picture of it? They had just built the Christian church, and it was lovely. And it had, yes, that's it. And it had stained glass windows up here. And no, it was the baptistry in the front of the church. And, well, that's about what I remember.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I was trying to...
And what were some of your most vivid memories or most enjoyable memories from childhood?
Oh, I have a lot of those, because even though we were poor, but we moved back to town in about, I think when I was about 7 years old, and we lived in a house that was right across from the lumber yard. And as I said, my siblings were all much older than I was, so I was kind of lonesome, and I'd play out in the yard. Well, soon it was my best friend to be, Charlene Major, who lived with her grandparents Charlie and Elizabeth Shinn, and he was mayor of Smithville. And her mother and dad had divorced. And so her mother was living in Jefferson City, and so she lived with the grandma and grandpa. Well, she would come over to the lumber yard because her dad and Uncle Orrin Major were the owners of the Major Lumber Company. Well, she'd come over to see her dad, but she was lonely all by herself. So when she saw me out in the yard, she came over and we got to be very, very dear friends. And we stayed friends for many years. We played in the sand pile, and then her dad would give her a nickel or a dime to go to the drugstore. But they were always so good to me because they would give me also a nickel or a dime, and we could go get an ice cream cone or a Coca-Cola. And anyway, she was much more privileged than I. She got to take dance lessons, but they were, her grandma and grandpa were exceptionally nice to me, because at Christmas time, even though I may not have had much at home, each one would bring me a Christmas present. It might just be a little coloring book, or it might be just a small toy, but it was a remembrance, and they did that every year. And so, as I said, and to this day, I remember Mr. and Ms. Shinn, who are buried in Smithville Cemetery, and I take flowers to their grave every year at Memorial Day, because it was very, very meaningful to me. And then Charlene's aunt, Med, thought we should learn to play bridge, so she tried to teach us to play bridge, and that was my beginning of learning to play bridge. And then later, when I was about in the 6th grade, Charlene moved to Jefferson City to live with her mother. And so I was real sad about that. But, oh, I had a picture back. I'll have to back up a little. The picture of the, oh dear. We had a little, what was that? Well, I can't, but here it is. We had what you called a little rhythm band. And this is a picture of Charlene, my best friend. And then this is me way over here next to the end. And I was always one of the shortest ones, so I was usually on the end. But we played over the radio in 1933. And oh, we were so thrilled. Yeah, it has the date on it. June 11th, 1933. And I played sticks, I believe, and then we had tambourines, and we had triangles, and, well, anyway, and then some played the drum. But it was very meaningful. We had a good time. And we were just, I think I was 2nd grade. But that's a picture of us on the radio. And the mothers made all the little old costumes. It was just white material with a red stripe around it. But then we had little hats, too. So that was our debut. Oh, yes, one of them played a violin, too. I forgot that. I think that was Charles Ray Taylor. But anyway, that was our debut.
And you'd already mentioned this a little bit, but what all do you remember about the Depression?
Oh, lots and lots. there were, they had, sometimes bread lines. Government would offer Spam, because really people were starving. And later on, my sister-in-law's dad had a store downtown, and he was a very nice fellow. And so a lot of the customers would buy groceries, but then they didn't have money to pay for them, so they'd put it on account. And Mr. Hamilton was so kind. He didn't have the heart, because he knew the kids were hungry, that then they couldn't pay their bill. And so eventually I think he had to close his store. But well, people though kind of banded together. When you say the Depression, we were all poor, but only like the druggist or the banker, or a few, a lawyer, really were affluent. But the rest of us in the town were poor and modest means. I wore almost all hand-me-downs, and we wore skirts made from feed sacks, but we didn't mind because everybody else had a feed sack skirt too. And we pretty much enjoyed our childhood though. We played games, and your neighbors, you didn't even lock your doors because people were honest, and if you needed help, your neighbors would help you. I'm saying, like Mr. Shin, we didn't have any money, but Charlene did. They did. But that didn't mean anything. They had a nice car. They'd take me when they took her. And it seemed as though people just helped each other and were caring for each other. And so we got through it. And then the CCC Camp came along. Let's see, what else? Yes, later, well, my brother Adrian also went to the CCC Camp. And then later, my husband-to-be, Lowell Bender, was in the CC Camp, plus his brother was in CC Camp. So it was several years. It kept families really from starving. And of course, we always raised, had a garden and tried to raise food as much as we could. And my mother baked all her own bread. Of course, we didn't have radios or, well, later, when I was about in the 7th grade, the radios were just coming in, and electricity, I believe. That is for us. Now, I think downtown, like in Charlene's house, they had, because I remember thinking, oh, they have a gas stove, and they had a bathroom indoors. And I thought, they must have lots of money. But no, the Depression times were, there was good and bad, but it was hard. Everybody did whatever they could. Same way with jobs. My dad helped a lot of farmers, and but you just did what you could to keep from starving.
And what about high school memories? What were some highlights of high school?
I have lots of those, and they are fond memories. I started, I didn't show all the pictures of my This was my oldest brother, Eugene, and this was my second brother, Adrian, and then this was my sister, Ione, and then this was me, and then that was me in school. I don't know how old I was there. Maybe I wasn't even in school yet, but and I think this was just, well, I don't know when we first moved to Smithville. But high school, I went all 12 grades to Smithville High School, and I was I was a pretty good student, or I worked hard. I'll put it that way. I wasn't real smart, but I worked hard. And I loved my first grade teacher. It was Margaret Collins, and at that time, teachers could not be married. They had to be a miss, and she was a Miss Margaret. But oh, I thought, I just loved her, and I know we had slate boards, blackboards, and erasers. So I would, after school, I wanted to go by, and so I wanted to clean all the erasers for her, so they'd be ready to start the next day. And then through school, we just, we had plays. And I remember we went to in about junior high, we went to the American Royal, and then we had senior play. And of course, when I was growing up, again, even those Depression years, we had on Saturday nights in the summer, we always had band concerts, and they had a city band, town band, and they'd play. And then usually the church would have an ice cream supper, and so the farmers would all bring their eggs and their crops to town, and then they'd shop at the grocery store or the Morton Mercantile, and so it was pretty happy times, though, even though we were poor. And as I said, I loved high school, and I had some really good friends. Most of them are deceased now. Phyllis Jean Severs was one of my best friends, and then Letty Coram. And I was 16 when, well, we lived in the east part of town, and we didn't have a car, so my mother would need some groceries. So I would, after school, I'd walk to town, down to the grocery store, and as I went down to Ben Russell's store, I went right by a garage, and that is where this young man was working on cars. Now, where's that picture? And here it is. Here he is. He was always very slender, but he thought I was kind of pretty. So he would always say, "Hi, good looking." And I'd go by, and I was thrilled to death because I was just young. And so anyway, one time, am I getting ahead of myself?
No, this is fine. But you don't want to hide the picture in front of you. Hide your face behind the picture.
Oh no. So, well, how about it?
But yeah, keep telling. I definitely want to hear about how you guys met and all of that.
Well, all right. He had a 1933 Chevrolet. I believe it was a 30 coupe, and it had a rumble seat in it. And so anyway, he had a good friend, Jerry Boydston, and he was going with Marjorie Coram. And so they wanted to go roller skating one time. And so Lowell got up the nerve to ask me to go roller skating with him. And we went down to, let's see, a Wynwood skating rink, I believe it was. And that was my first date. And so he fell down, I remember that, and tore his trousers, and so he was kind of angry at that. But anyway, that was the first date, and this was now in 1940, the summer of 42, because, and then, we went to movies. You could go to the movies for 20 cents. And if you were below 12, you could go for 10 cents. And then my niece, Joyce, was born at Liberty, Missouri on June 30th, 1942. Well, I was so excited. I wanted to see her so badly. So Lowell said he would take me over to see my baby niece. And he did. And so anyway, we dated all that summer. And then September 2nd, on his 21st birthday, he left for the United States Marine Corps. The draft was on for World War II, and he knew he'd be drafted, so he joined the Marines. And he said, I remember him saying on his 21st birthday, he was he was on the train headed to San Diego, California. And I think he was going across, Colorado. And I can't think where well, anyway. So he was in training in boot camp in San Diego. And he wrote me letters and then went overseas. And of course, it was war times, so you had to be very cautious what you wrote in a letter because they were censored. And let's see. Then, do you want me to continue about the war? Or you want me to wait?
Can we take a break here?
Yeah.
Maybe I was just looking through these things that your classmates wrote about you. They were very interesting. Would you like to read one or two?
Oh,
This is from your junior year.
oh, I know, but
Everybody remember me and how much trouble we have had with our brother. Best wishes, Dick. You remember?
Oh, yeah,
With our big brother.
yeah.
That's just this is up to you, but I think these are really interesting. This is a girl who has been one of my best friends ever since we started in the first grade. I hope we will always be friends. Lots of luck. Your school classmate, Mary Ann Cockerell.
Cockerell, yeah. And she was one of my best friends.
Yeah, I remember.
This is my best friend. I have really had a sweet time, soul time with you this year, and I'm looking forward to our senior year together. I wish you lots of success and a great deal of happiness. Letty.
Yeah.
Remember?
She
Yeah.
mentioned Letty.
As I said, we had lots of friends. I mean, I did have lots of
Yeah,
friends.
your whole book is full of things. This one even said you have lots of faults.
Oh, yeah, well, that's what I say. Oh, yes.
But you sounded love Darish or Doris. You have
Doris.
lots of faults.
Yeah, that's Doris Mason. She'd
At least
sit,
she was
see, my
honest.
name was Makings, and she sat right behind me
Oh, my.
in all my classes, so. Oh, yeah, that reminds me then, when you sit in my, school, am I back on
Yes.
camera? well, then school memories, we didn't get to have a senior trip because the gas was rationed and tires were rationed. So our class did not get to go on a trip. But then we had prom, but we made everything. We made the invitations. And then we were so excited because we got a day off from school to do the decorating. And we made a great, big, beautiful center light piece. It was a ball, and everybody brought little mirrors and put on it, and we pasted those on. Well, then, when we got it to turn, well, then that would glitter all the way around. But those were all handmade. And then we made a little, seemed like we had a little stream down somehow. But, and the mothers all cooked the food because you didn't have money to go to a restaurant or anything like that. And so they cooked all the food, and the sophomores would serve the juniors and seniors. And of course the juniors, it was a party that the juniors gave for the seniors leaving. And so we always had a good time, and I always had a nice date. Let's see, a junior year, I think I went with, yes, I went with Jimmy Wright. He's from, was from Trimble. Then my senior year, I went with, I think it was Donald Motto. But I always had lots of dates. They were pretty nice fellas. And one very, very complimentary thing I remember, I was voted football queen. And then Mary Lloyd Tall was one of my attendants, and Mildred Allen Asher was the other one. And so it was a very memorable time. And then we had an annual, but we had to put it all together ourselves, but we did get it printed. So we had a lot of high school memories. And we made our own fun, but we had a good time. I was never good at sports. I was too short. And I wasn't a good baseball player, but we had a lot of fun. And let's see.
Yeah, if you wanted to, you could pick up and talk some more about the war and just your experience with that.
All right. Well, as I said, Lowell was very faithful in writing to me, but then he had to be cautious. He couldn't tell me, oh yes, yes, this is a picture of him as a Marine, and then this is his brother, William W.B., and he was a pilot. Lowell was a Marine, and then he got to be a, let's see, first class, I think, and he was sent to the Pacific, and of course they had to take the islands, and he couldn't really tell us till he got home, but I think he was in the Marshall Islands. He was also in the Samoa Islands, and then he was wounded on the island of Guam. He started to lie down on a pile of straw or something, and something just told him not to do that. So he moved on over, and then just a few seconds later was when a bomb hit right there. And he was wounded in the back with a piece of the shrapnel. And so then he was sent, he was in the hospital, I think in New Caledonia or somewhere there. And then later he was sent to Balboa Park Hospital in San Diego. He was brought back to the States, and that was in 1942, in December. No, 43, I'm sorry, 43, yes, 1943, December of that. And no, that would be 42, no?
No, because he left in 42. You say he left in 42.
What?
You said he left in 42.
Yes, he did. He left in 42.
September.
Yes, that's
So you wouldn't
right.
have been out of
Exactly.
basic
No.
until
All right. It was in 43. Uh-huh.
And then you graduated, so you were able to go out there.
No, I may have my dates wrong. I'm thinking it was because we were married in 45. Yes, I am a year off because he came back to the States and was in the hospital. And then he was so lonesome, he wanted me to come out to see him. Well,
And you were already working.
what?
You were already working.
Yes, I had already graduated from high school, and I was working for the U.S. Epperson, that's an insurance company, making $90 a month. And so anyway, a couple from Smithville lived out in San Diego, and it was Horace and Jean Jones. And so they said I'd be welcome to stay with them if I could come. So therefore, I saved my money for a railroad ticket, and it took us 2 days and 3 nights to get from Kansas City to San Diego, California. But then it was one of the best times I ever had in my life. We rode the bus downtown, we'd go to dinner at a hotel. Then for New Year's Eve, we rode the bus up to Los Angeles. And I remember we went to a party at the Palladium, and I believe it was Gene Krupa's band. But oh, we just had a wonderful time. And then I came on back home, and he was discharged, I can't remember dates, but in January or February. And then we were married in June of 1945.
What day?
June 14th. Oh yes, and I've got a wedding picture there. Oh, back to the war, my brother was in the Navy. And this was our wedding picture. And let's see, and then this was, our party. We had a party at the hotel, President, I think. No, Continental. That's right. And we were married by Reverend Baxter Waters at Liberty, Missouri, at his home. And Mary Ann Cockrell was my maid of honor, and Red Waring was Lowell's best man, because WB was still in the Air Force.
Now there's probably a 1,000 things, but what were some of your favorite things about your husband?
He was very honest, very hardworking, very determined, and so he went to work. Well, we lived in a little old apartment, upstairs, attic apartment we called it, and it was so hot, miserably hot. But then at night, I was still working, But when I'd come home, we'd go out to his grandma's, Grandma Bender's. She had a little farm down around Gashland, and we'd sleep outside because it was too hot upstairs. And then about midnight, we'd get up and go home, where it was a little cooler. But Lowell was going to learn to be a mechanic on the GI Bill. And he worked for Allied Motors. And they were training him on Chrysler products. And so he did real well. But in the wintertime, when the garage was closed up and the motors were running, all those fumes made him sick. So he just couldn't continue that. So in the summer, his dad was building houses. So he said, well, that was outside work in the fresh air. So he would teach him a carpenter business. And so that's what they did. They built houses for, I can't think of his name, but anyway, they built houses for a while, and then Uncle Bill Gabbard had moved to California, and he said, oh, the building boom out there was in full swing. Could he come out there and help? And so he did. He worked out there for about 3 weeks, and then came on back home. And that's when, I believe 1946, we bought the house where we live now. But it only had 4 rooms and a bathroom and a basement. And it had been moved in from the country. But I can remember we bought it for $5,000, and we put $500 down on it. And then we paid $30 a month. And that was about $25 toward the principal and $5 toward the interest. But that was our first home. Now let's see. What else do you want me to?
Why don't you tell me some about when you guys had kids? What was that was like?
Well, all right. I was still working, and he was too. And I found out I was pregnant in, 1950. And with my first daughter, Diana Lynn. And we lived there in Smithville, and we had a gas stove, and it was warm. But I was a very foolish mother. I had read so many baby books that it said I needed to sterilize the diapers and sterilize the bottles and everything. And so I did. I boiled the diapers every day. And I had a sterilizer, and I sterilized all the bottles and the nipples every day. So then I was so tired, I couldn't really enjoy the baby. But I remember, see, it was January 31st, 1950. And it was very, very cold. So we couldn't really get out and do a whole lot because I was afraid she'd take pneumonia or a cold. And that was my first one. You want me to continue with the, yeah. All right. Well then, my husband had always wanted a farm. And so Uncle Bill and Aunt Addie had owned this little farm east of town and it was 48 acres. Well, Lowell's mother and dad had purchased it from them when they went to California. So then, since he wanted to start farming, why, his mother and dad said we could move out there, and 47 acres he put in corn, and he had some hogs, and so we did move out there. However, there was an outside bathroom and only a pump and a sink in the kitchen. So and then I had to wash out in the shed. But I did have an electric washing machine. And so anyway, then I found out I was pregnant with Nancy. And that was 1952. And oh, it was hot. But I raised chickens, and I remember we had baby chickens, and electricity, and we had a brooder outside. Electricity would go off, so I'd pick those little chickens up and bring them inside so they wouldn't freeze. Then we'd take them back out. But oh, we raised them, and then when we'd butcher them and put them in the freezer, we didn't have a freezer of our own, but to downtown, we had a locker, and we'd put them in the locker, and oh, were they ever good. Anyway, with Nancy, oh, it was hot. And here I was pregnant with her, with a little toddler, and then I just thought I'd die. I'd never make it to August. And she was supposed to come about the end of July. But she did not arrive till August 11th of 1952. But anyway, I can remember, I thought, oh, I don't want to go to the hospital early. And about 5 o'clock, I was having, or earlier than that, I was having some pains, and I thought, oh, they'll probably pass. But anyway, they kept getting worse. So finally, I told Lowell, I said, I think maybe I better go to the hospital. And he said, all right. So anyway, Dr. Hobbs was my doctor. He took me to the hospital, and then he went to take Diana up to her grandmother's. And then, by the time he came back, Nancy had arrived. And she was Nancy Jo Bender. And then Diane had had a lot of colics, so we had been up a lot with her at nights. But my sister had said, why don't you put that kid on, Nancy she was talking about, on K-Rose syrup and carnation milk. I thought, well, it's worth a try. Well, it satisfied her, and she'd just sleep and sleep and sleep. And poor Diana would put her on lactogen, which was a powdered milk, and it was just about like water. And that she was always hungry. That's what was wrong. And then she had allergies, which was very bad. And, well, then I just forgot to show my brother was in the Navy, and I think he went in 1943, I believe. But we, from our family, we had my husband, who was in the Marine Corps, and my brother-in-law, who was in the Air Force, and Adrian, who was in the Navy. Then my oldest brother, though, did not, he was deferred because he was on the farm, and they needed to raise food for the people and the soldiers. And so therefore he was deferred. Okay. Whoops. And then this was a picture again of my husband and I when my niece Joyce was married. And my sister had made the dresses for Diana and Nancy because they were little, I think, flower girls. And then this is Debbie. I'm getting ahead of myself.
That's fine.
But Debbie, I remember Debbie was kind of scratching, and I thought, well, what's wrong? Well, bless her heart, when she got home, she had a rash and she broke out with the measles. So that was, I remember that was the day they were married. So, okay. Got another question, or what am I?
Yeah, and so. No, you're fine.
We just had Diana and Nancy born, and now
Okay,
we still need
that's
Debbie
right.
to be born.
All
So we're chronologically,
You want me to
you
go
move
on?
back.
Yeah, just maybe go back to the pregnancy.
Yes, okay. Well, after Nancy was born, as I said, we had an outdoor bathroom, and it was kind of hard because then I had to give them a bath in the tub or in the sink. And so Lowell and his dad built 2 rooms, 2 big, nice bedrooms on the south side of her house so that we would have more room back in town, so we'd have more room for our growing family. So we moved back to 409 Maple in Smithville when I believe Nancy was in kindergarten, or was it you? Because
elementary years.
you were in elementary school, right? Okay. So if she was in kindergarten, you'd have probably been in 2nd grade by then. So Dinah would have been in 2nd grade, and Nancy was in kindergarten. And Miss Thompson was their teacher. And what I remember, this says something about memories. I can remember with Nancy, she always wanted to take her shoes off. So when she was in kindergarten, when they were through, before she could come home, they'd have to go find Nancy's shoes so she could put her shoes back on and come home. And more memories. I don't know if do you want me to continue there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, all right. I do remember them with, let's see, Diana's teacher was Cora Bogmar, if I remember right.
In 4th grade.
4th grade, okay. But when we moved back in the 2nd grade, who was your teacher then? Oh, 3rd grade was,
Just Betty Justice.
yeah, Betty Justice, that's right. But I remember we had a Christmas program, and I believe Nancy was just 1st grade, and that's when she had a little pair of pajamas, and she sang Jolly Old St. Nicholas, and John Spinagle was Santa Claus. I can remember that, and so I was real proud of her. And then, let's see, Diana had, lots of, well, she was smart. Well, she was, because when she was a freshman in high school, I think she had the highest grade point. Now,
Debbie hasn't been born yet. Come on. We moved back to town.
yes, we
And
did.
then-
They
okay,
added
we're
the
in
2
grade
rooms.
school, so-
Well, all right. After that, he still, Lowell still helped his dad, did carpenter work, and had did some farming too. And we had an old red tractor, I remember that. But he decided that he wanted to farm full time. Well, I just couldn't go along with it because we had to borrow money to start. We didn't have the land or anything, but this Horace and Jean Jones that I had stayed with in California had inherited this farm out on KK Road. And they said, it was 80 acres, I believe. And so they said they would rent it to Lowell if he wanted to farm. Well, I was just sure that we'd starve to death because we borrowed money to live on, to get started, to buy some machinery. And then I found out I was pregnant with Debbie. I thought, oh, this poor little baby will freeze to death because there was no insulation on the farmhouse and the windows were not with any storm sash, and I just knew we'd freeze. Well, long story short, we moved out. The house was a mess, so we had to paint and paper and clean it up as best we could. But it did have a bathroom, and it had 2 bedrooms and a dining room. But we had an oil heater in the kitchen, and we had a coal stove in the living room. Well, if you'd get very far away from the stove, you'd freeze. So I remember we put Debbie's cradle in the dining room because that was the middle of the house, and it was about the warmest because we got heat from the kitchen, we got heat from the living room. And so anyway, when we moved out there, my brother and sister-in-law had bought the farm about half a mile up KK Road, where my nephew Phil now farms. And I was going to have them for supper because they were moving and I knew they did not have a stove hooked up. So therefore, I'd invited them for supper. Well, my husband and his dad were working down at the Christian church, closing in the balcony for a nursery for the little ones. So then I thought, I don't feel very good. I'd baked a pie. I remember that. I'd baked a custard pie. And I thought, ooh, maybe I better see the doctor. So I called Lowell at the Christian church. He came home and took me to the doctor. And Dr. Hobbs, I remember him saying, well, you're not going to cook supper for anybody tonight. You're going to the hospital. And they're going to serve you tonight. And therefore I did. And then Debbie arrived. I can't remember just what time, but that in a very short time. So I always told Helen and Eugene they got cheated out of their supper because Debbie arrived. But anyway, we lived out there, and Lowell worked very, very hard, but he was very happy. And he bought a stock truck to haul cattle and hogs for many of the farmers, which he loved, talking to all of them, and it was a cash income for us to buy groceries on. And then the kids were in 4-H, and we stayed there till, well, I know Debbie was in kindergarten because we had a carpool of, let's see, there was,
Mid-60s.
Well, can't think of Armstrongs and Bruce's and who was the girl? Miller and one more. Well, anyway, we had a carpool that would drive once a week to kindergarten and pick up all the 5 kids. And so we had that for a while. Then we decided it was pretty crowded out there, so we moved back to Smithville to 409 Maple when Diana,
About 1965.
were you a junior?
65.
65?
66, around in there.
Okay, so you was
Well,
about
we moved back before the flood.
yes, it was,
So that would've
right
been
before the
yeah, so it was probably
1965
1964.
flood in Smithville. And the 65 flood just destroyed so many homes in Smithville. It was never the same. And also it got into the basement of the school, and they therefore decided they really needed to build a new school, which they bought the land up on Commercial Avenue and built the new school that we have now.
Nancy was the first to graduate.
What's that?
Wasn't Nancy the first class to graduate?
And Nancy, yes, that's right.
Which was in
Nancy's class
1970.
of 1970 was the first class to graduate from the new high school up on Commercial Avenue. And, let's see, what else questions?
And then just, I guess since you've, after your kids have been raised and out of the home and married, what have been some of your favorite parts of life?
Well, we took many nice vacations, and then my daughters, Nancy was married first in 1972 at the First Christian Church in Smithville, and she married Richard Gene Little from Clever, Missouri. And it was very, very cold. I think when we went down to a shower in Clever for Nancy and Dick, it was about 20 below zero, if I remember right. Because then we went over to, well, let's see, we had to pick up material for Debbie's and Diana's dresses. They wore green velveteen dresses. And then Nancy and Dick were married at the Christian Church on January 29th, 1972.
Then the next year,
And then the next year,
November.
November, Diana and David Michael Perkins were married at the Christian Church. And each one had a different kind of reception. Nancy and Dick's was a sit-down dinner over at Kearney, Missouri. And then Diana and Mike's was cake and punch, wasn't it, in the basement of the Christian Church. But there were so many people that we couldn't afford a sit-down dinner for them all. And then that left just Debbie in high school And she graduated. Oh dear.
76.
Was that
No,
right?
77. Yeah, she's 5 years behind me.
All right, I think so. And she went, all of my children, I am so proud, all of my children and all of my grandchildren have graduated from college, from high school and then from college. And I have one with a doctor's degree and two with
3 with
master's degree and one that's working on a master's degree. And then I have a grandson who graduated from engineers school,
Yeah, Rolla.
Rolla, and he is now a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Engineers Division at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Now let me see, where was I? Let's see. Yeah, what were your children's names when they were born? Okay.
Sometime when their grandchildren started coming.
What's that again?
You were talking about trips.
Oh, yes.
Grandchildren.
Oh,
So then,
yes.
as
Most
after the
memorable, yes.
grandchildren were born,
Was-
then Lowell would take them on
right.
vacation.
Well, when Debbie had graduated from Southwest Missouri State, she then was doing an internship in Richmond, Virginia, to be a dietitian. And so in the summer, we took a trip to see her and took my oldest granddaughter, Michelle, and my oldest grandson, Ryan, he was just 5 years old. Michelle was 6 years old, and we took them on this trip, and Nancy came with us to see Debbie, and we had a great time. I think then didn't we go to Washington, D.C. then? Yes. We took them to the capital, to Washington, D.C., and we had a great time. Then, later on, we went to Glacier National Park. My husband had he bought the Mackey tray. That was a big van. Am I getting off of the beat? Okay.
Sorry. Ryan and Michelle you took, and then you took Jeff and Kelly.
Oh, yes.
And then he brought the marquee tray.
Okay.
And then didn't you take
All right. Yes, we did take. That's
Tim
right.
and Jeff?
We
in
took-
the honeymoon suite.
That's right. We took Nancy and Jeff. No, not Nancy and Jeff.
Nancy
Kelly.
and Jeff and Kelly.
Yeah, that's right. And we went, but then it's when we went to Yellowstone National Park.
That's with Chris. You took Chris there
That was Glacier National Park.
in Yellowstone.
Well, anyway, we took them on trips, and we really had a great time. Then at a later date, we went to Glacier National Park with Tim and Chris, because he was only about 8 years old, and it was a long, long trip. And Mike drove. We had a wonderful time. And we went to Yellowstone first, then we went to Glacier National Park. And, well, the invention that I think is really most, that has impacted my life was the coming of electricity, because growing up, we didn't have radios, we did not have TV, and when we curled our hair, We had kerosene lamps, and we studied by kerosene lamps. And then if you curled your hair, you'd put a curling iron on the chimney to get it hot. You'd have to be careful that it wasn't too hot to burn your hair, but then that would curl. You could curl your hair with that curling iron. The same way with ironing a shirt. My mother had to use irons on a wood stove and get them the right temperature to iron my brother's white shirts. And I just marveled at how she could iron them without scorching them and getting them the right temperature. But she did. And then I think the electricity, and of course then getting a furnace, because as I said, we lived in so many cold houses that I'd go to bed cold and I'd wake up cold. And then of course the electricity that led to TVs, and then the telephone. We used to have a country line where there were about 5 or 6 neighbors on the same line. And but electricity has just played such an important part. Now computers, and now telephones, and just given us so many conveniences. Amazing automatic washers, dryers. We are really spoiled in this age to what it was many years ago.
What was it like when you heard about Pearl Harbor? I thought that was interesting. Where were you when you heard about it, and what was the reaction?
Pearl Harbor?
1941, December.
Uh-huh.
The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. We were at the Pearl Harbor, remember?
It was on a Sunday morning. I think we were getting ready to go to church. And we heard that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor and sunk, what was that, about 3,000 ships, or 3,000 sailors and soldiers had died. And I remember thinking, well, the Japanese ambassador, or anyway, was in Washington, D.C. talking peace with President Roosevelt. And then here they bombed us while he was talking peace. And but I do remember when President Roosevelt died. I was on an elevator. I'd been working, and I was on an elevator at work, going down, when somebody said, "Did you hear the news?" And I just remember being shocked, completely shocked. Then, well, let's see, what else?
What about John F. Kennedy when he was assassinated?
Yes.
How did that hit you?
Well, very hard.
And with these various things that that are brought up, just for, since the video will be cut, just rephrase like, when JFK was assassinated, so.
Mm-hmm.
You were at home, Mom.
Well, let's
We
see.
were all in school. I was only in junior high, so that was a different dynamic.
It was. Well, I can't remember exactly, honestly. But as Diana said, she was in junior high, Debbie was in grade school. Well, I guess Nancy must have been, I don't know what year that was. But well, this is, I do remember though, after, well, what year was that? Oh, I know Debbie, I believe she had graduated. And that was 78, wasn't it? I know. And we had lost some money on some cattle, and I said, somebody's got to go to work with a steady income. And so I thought, well, nobody will hire me until I have some more schooling. So I went down to check into Maple Woods Community College. And so I went back to school for about 2 years, and I got a secretarial science degree, I believe it was. And Barbara Murphy and I remember, drove together. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the students, and I had to work very, very hard, especially in history, because I couldn't remember all the details. And I'd come home, and after we'd had a lesson, well, then I'd type out a lot of the facts so I could remember it. And but it was really one of the very best moves I ever made. I graduated and with an associate's degree, and then I went to work, well, for Southwestern Bell Telephone in North Kansas City. And you transcribed, well, you had a cassette, and then you transcribed proposals that the different ones had gone out to try to sell a system to a customer. Then they would broadcast it on a cassette. Then they'd send the cassettes to us, and we would transcribe them, type them all out, and assemble them, and then give them back to them. But it was it was very interesting. But then Southwestern Bell and AT&T dissolved. They and you had the choice of either staying with Southwestern Bell or going to AT&T. And I decided, since AT&T had a lot more to offer, I went with them. And so then I did work for them 17 years, and then I had a heart attack in 1996. That's it, 96. And I tried to, well, I was in the hospital for quite a long time, but that changed my life, because then I had to, if I wanted to live, I had to change my way of living. And I did not eat a lot of red meat or a lot of fats. And then I had to exercise. It told me exercise and diet. And when I came home from the hospital, I was so weak I couldn't hardly even lift my hands. And I went to rehab and got on a treadmill. They said, you can do it. And I said, no, I cannot. I haven't got enough energy. Yes, you can. So they helped me up on that treadmill, and I went for just a few minutes. Then the next day I had to come back, and I went for a few minutes longer. Till you just keep building up. Finally, I got a little more strength. I tried to go back to work, but then let's see, what did I do? They had to call an ambulance. and I went to North Tennessee Hospital. So that was into my working career. But the company was very good to me, for we had lived on the farm, no health insurance, because we couldn't afford to buy our own. It was too high. And they provided me health insurance and a lot of really good things that I was very, very appreciative of, and still am. And now I do get a small pension from AT&T besides my Social Security. And so then, let's see, we bought another farm. That's what we did. We had rented that farm. What?
The lake.
Oh, yes, the lake condemned and took the little farm that we had purchased from his mother and dad. And then you had to reinvest that money in land, or you'd pay all that tax on it. So we bought the north 80 acres from at northwest of town from Clyde Collier. And so we farmed that, and then, I don't know my years, but then Lowell got into poor health. He ran the stock truck as long as he could, and then we had cattle. I remember I had to have the neighbor boy help me, and we went out to feed the cattle, but no longer could we take care of that. So we moved back to town to 409 Maple, and let's see, then he really had poor health from then on, if I remember right. And he finally he was in a wheelchair. And he went to KU Hospital. And then, well, in 2005, he passed away.
He worked at the elementary school.
Oh, yes, he did.
And mowed,
Yes, he did.
Until he was 80.
Yes, he did. After,
Just say that. Don't
oh,
say
yes,
the
and
name.
then, yes, before he got really ill, he worked for the school system, and mowed the grounds, and, well, he did some janitorial work for a while.
I'm a safety officer.
Safety officer, okay. Oh, that's right, because for the school buses. And he enjoyed that, and he enjoyed Dr. Legard and Mr. Buckner and all the teachers, and they were good to him too. And my son-in-law was maintenance supervisor there, Michael Perkins. And it was a very sad year of 2005 because Lowell passed away in January of 2005. And then Michael, who was a wonderful person, helped me so much after Lowell died. But then he was hit by a lady. What?
Can we just say he passed away?
He passed away, all right.
Could you edit that? I'm sorry,
In September
yeah, he passed
September.
away in September of 2000.
of 2005. And that was one of the saddest moments of our lives. And we still miss him.
And
It's
what's something, this is a two-part question, so you could answer either one before. What's something from earlier in your life that you're glad has changed in the world now, and something that you think it was maybe better back then?
It was better back then. The feeling of that people had with one another. There was much more of a what would I say, brotherhood. Of course, the town was smaller and the school was smaller. But as a whole, there was more love and tolerance and, as I say, helping your neighbor. For instance, like our neighbor there in town, Virgil Connor, always raised popcorn. He had a little tract. And then he got sick, and he could not harvest it. So Lowell, who lived on this side, and Dan Coleman, who lived across the street, and Fred Jones, who was a friend, all got together, gathered the corn, sold it, and did everything that Virgil would have done and gave it to his widow. It was just a matter of helping each other. And of course, a lot of the farmers always did that. When we first moved out on KK, why, Mr. French, Mr. Ballinger, and Lowell, they all worked together, putting up hay. And there was more of a, I wouldn't say more, but more of a work ethic in a different way. And seems like now, as prosperity has come, there is more just love of money rather than the helping of people. I mean, that's just my opinion.
And then maybe what's something that you appreciate that has changed?
A furnace. Truly, I appreciate a furnace, a warm house. Now you say something I appreciate. Well, I appreciate my family very, very much. And I appreciate a car, having mobility, and really, again, Social Security, which I hope sincerely will not be done away with, for I think it's one of the best programs that was ever created. Because in your working days, you can pay into it, and then when you are older and no longer able to work, you do have an income. And I appreciate that for my mother, because my dad, in the last, 10 years, he worked at the mill in North Kansas City, and he paid into Social Security. So then when he passed away, she could draw on his, and that's the way she was able to stay in her home and pay her gas, lights, water, and have food to eat. So I really appreciate that. And
what's something? What are things that you've really, pieces of wisdom you've come across over your years that you feel like you'd like to share with maybe the younger generation?
always do unto others as you would have them do unto you, because I firmly believe what goes around comes around. If you have cheated someone back in your life and you think, oh, you got away with it, it was all right, sooner or later that will come around in your life and someone will probably have cheated you. I just believe with all my heart that being kind to one another and treating one another with respect is one of, well, as the Bible says, you love one another you live humbly, and you walk daily with your Lord. And I believe so. That's really a recipe to your happy life.
And also, what have been some of the most important moments in your walk of faith with the Lord, of how you really came to know Him and seek Him and serve Him?
Well, one that comes to my mind is back when Debbie was in Richmond, Virginia. And she had that Frank, that old car that we had. And their only source of entertainment was they could get enough money for gas to take some side trips. Well, anyway, when her internship was over, she was going to drive back home. And I remember praying, oh, Lord, please help that car to make it from Virginia to Missouri and not break down some way halfway in between. Because how in the world would I get her? Anyway, when she got back, I think to the, where was she? Someplace in Missouri, she called me. And I thought then, oh, good Lord, you've answered our prayer. At least she's in the state of Missouri. That's just one instance that I think of. And there's many more. Many more. Well.
Grandkids coming home from Africa.
Oh, yes. Yes. Michelle coming home from Africa and being safe and not being hurt.
Maybe share the premise of that story.
Yes. My oldest granddaughter, Michelle, was so sweet. She decided to be, I think as a journalist, journeyman. And she went to Tanzania, Africa, to work with the people there and help evangelize and work with the missionaries. And she did. She was there for, was it 4 years?
3.5.
3.5 years. And she did a lot of good work. And she lived with the natives. She said they were a happy group, though. They did not have much money. They didn't have much. But if you had been in a church service and they had anything at all, they'd invite you to come home to lunch and share it with them. But then I thought, oh, just keep her safe. And she was then, when we saw like the elephants and she was out in the bush part of the time too, where they cooked with rocks and no stoves. But she worked with the people and she was happy. She was wonderful. Then she came back and got her master's degree. Didn't she do that afterwards? And she went to Minnesota, and she now works as a social worker in Minneapolis, for the state of Minneapolis. But I'm proud of all of my 7 grandchildren, every one of them. And I have one of my proudest ones. Where's my great-grandchildren?
Yeah,
I have 5. Oh, wait a minute, where are they?
if you're gonna,
What?
if you're gonna say what Michelle does, then you probably need to say Ryan. I mean, don't just.
Oh, yes, all right.
I mean, I don't know. Or
Each
think ahead, like Ryan and Kelly and Jeff.
Yes. Well, they have each done many, and they have
I don't
made
know.
mission trips to Guatemala, and Tim. Well, I'll go down the line. Ryan is a salesman. He works for well, I can't tell you the name of it, but they make limousines and hearses for the mortuaries. And he goes to trade shows and shows their products and demonstrates them. And he's a very good salesman. Very personable. And he's honest. And so I'm proud of him too. And Kelly's next. And Kelly has done many things. She also has had a trip around the world, and she has gone on mission trips. Seemed like it was Guatemala, wasn't it? And no?
Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia, yes. And then she has come back, and she worked for William Jewell. She married, and then she taught English to foreign students at Northeast at Kirksville. And she did a very good job with that. Then she was married, and she has 3 beautiful little children that we adore. And then Jeff figures, if I understand right, he figures water sewer systems, is that right? Costs of them for different towns and so forth. But he does a very good job. And he is married to his wife, Heather. And then we come to Tim. Yes. And Tim is quite a successful, he was always good, a good student. He graduated from William Jewell, then he graduated from Missouri MU Medical School, and then he did an internship. Residency. Was that in Honolulu? No.
Residency at Hennepin County Medical
Hennepin County Medical Center in Minneapolis. And then he is now a surgeon at Stillwater, Minnesota. And he is married to his beautiful wife, Kate, and they have 2 darling little boys, Alden and John Arlo. All right, then we come to Christopher, who he graduated from the engineering school at Rolla, Missouri, and then he has become graduated from officers training school. He is now a 2nd lieutenant in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and stationed down at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I'm very proud of him being in the service. And my youngest granddaughter, Taylor, is now at the University of Arkansas, and she is just about to complete her master's degree to be a speech therapist. So I am proud, very proud of all 7 of my grandchildren.
I like that one.
Well,
That shows all of them grown up.
well, yeah, this shows all my grandchildren grown up at Kelly's wedding. She is married to Russell Lee Huff.
And do you guys have any other particular questions? Or?
You think your grandchildren would like to know about your mom?
I think, like, Okay, do you have a picture of you could just say Clara, Judson, Lowell, Alden, John Arlo. You have the grades.
We don't have.
Oh, here it
pictures of
is.
all of them?
Here,
Oh,
here, this is what I was looking for. These are
Wait a
my,
minute. Are you on?
are you on?
Yeah.
These are my great-grandchildren, 5 of them. And there is Clara, the oldest, and then Judson, this Judson, and then Alden, and then Lowell, who is named for his great-grandfather and his uncle. And then John Arlo, who is named for his grandfather. So I am very proud of all 5 of them. They are adorable. Now let me see. Is there anything else? On this it says,
I won't be on this.
Yeah.
Maybe as not necessarily a summary, I think it would be fun for you to just say how busy you are now. I'm 93 years old. I volunteer for my church. I write cards every Sunday. I volunteer at the hospital in the sewing room on Monday. I play bridge twice a week. I do family dinners. I keep, just like at age 93, this is what, don't go into huge detail, but
is that
I
what
think
you want?
that's exciting that you're so productive still at age 93.
Yeah, you could just say I'm 93 and I still, and then just kind of share a bit about your life in the present day.
And put
Okay.
that piece of paper down because you're holding it in your face.
I know.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I am now 93 years old, but I still enjoy life. I am busy most all the time. I volunteer at the St. Luke's Hospital in Smithville every Monday in the sewing room. And we make walker bags for people with walkers and anything else that they need. And then I play bridge twice a week. And for the church, I send cards to the sick and the birthdays and anniversaries. And let's see, what else do I do? Then I go to church. I attend church every Sunday that I possibly can.
And family dinners.
And family dinners. And so I am really quite busy, just trying to keep my home going. And I enjoy it. And I enjoy my kids and my grandkids and great-grandkids. So, and I feel very, very grateful, blessed every day for every day of life.
Any last thoughts or words to add or words of wisdom or?
I
Well,
like that. Do unto others.
that's it. Do unto others. So, yeah, in closing, I would say that. Do unto others, and as you would have them do unto you. Be kind to one another, and help each other whenever you can. And pray every day.